Hey guys, tonight we're going back, not to a cozy medieval cottage or a bustling tavern, but to the dark, smoky edge of the village. The part where whispers start, where a shadow in the woods becomes a sentence, where "I saw her with a cat" becomes legal testimony. Tonight we're talking about witches, or rather, about people accused of witchcraft, most of whom were just slightly unusual, slightly poor, slightly female, or slightly too good with herbs. This was a time when curing headaches with lavender made you dangerous, when being single past 30 made you suspicious, and when standing near a failed crop meant you hexed it. Witch trials weren't about truth. They were about fear, control, and who could light a fire fastest. So, dim the lights. Wrap up in something warm. And don't mind the flickering shadows. It's probably just your neighbor gathering wood for your trial. Let's begin. Chapter 1. What counts as a witch? In theory, a witch was someone who made a pact with the devil. In practice, a witch was whoever the town didn't like this week. Are you poor? Suspicious? Are you rich? Suspicious and probably stealing from demons. Are you widowed, unmarried, or childless? Absolutely suspicious. Did you talk to yourself in public, have an opinion, or keep a cat that looked at someone funny? Get the kindling. Being called a witch didn't require magic. It just required someone to notice you didn't fit. Maybe you lived on the outskirts of the village. Maybe you brewed tea that helped people sleep. Maybe your bread rose a little too well. That was enough. There were tests, but they weren't tests. They were excuses. If your body had a mole or birthmark, that was a witch's mark, a place where demons fed, apparently. If you had no marks, you were hiding them. If you had too many, you were breeding devils. It was like trying to win a rigged game where every card said guilty. Sometimes your bad luck was contagious. If your neighbor's child got sick and you had recently spoken to her, cause and effect. If a cow died after you looked at it, congratulations. You hexed the livestock with your gaze. But here's the deeper, darker layer. Often, the people accused of witchcraft were already on the edge. Socially, economically, emotionally. They were the ones without protection. No powerful husband, no family, no allies. And a town in crisis needs someone to blame. Whether it's a bad harvest or a plague, someone's got to take the heat. It won't be the priest, or the mayor, or the bishop. It'll be you. The strange one. The easy target. Historical side note. In 16th century Trier, modern-day Germany, over 300 people were executed for witchcraft in just a few years, many of them older women who lived alone or who simply didn't attend church often enough. Fun fact: owning a broom wasn't damning unless you happened to store it outside, in which case it was obviously your aerial transportation. Because flying on a broom makes perfect sense if your real crime was owning property while female. And the worst part? You couldn't disprove it, because the more you denied it, the more they believed it. Only a witch would be so defensive. So if you cried, you were guilty. If you stayed calm, even more guilty. The only safe response was to nod politely, disappear, and hope nobody noticed your house. So what counts as a witch? Anything, everything, nothing. And once you're accused, there's no unwitching yourself. Because in this world, survival wasn't about innocence, it was about invisibility. But perhaps the most chilling part was just how common it all was. Witch trials didn't start with fire, they started with suspicion, with someone not fitting in. Take Alice Keitler, for example, a wealthy innkeeper in 14th century Ireland. She was accused of witchcraft, not because she cursed anyone, but because she outlived multiple husbands, had financial success, and, this is important, refused to hand over her money to the church. Her maid, Petronilla Demeath, was tortured until she confessed to helping Alice brew potions and summon demons. Alice. She fled the country, likely with the help of her allies in high places. Her maid, burned, making her the first woman in Ireland executed for heresy. In the end, it wasn't the magic that sealed their fate. It was money, independence, and being inconveniently female. Or Petronilla Demeath, her maid, the first recorded woman burned for heresy in Ireland. Her crime? Loyalty to her employer, and possibly knowing how to mix herbs. In the end, what counted as a witch had very little to do with actual witchcraft. It was about being visible when the village wanted you invisible. And if you happened to be smart, stubborn, or unlucky, your best defense was disappearance. Because once the village decided who the witch was, they never picked wrong. Chapter 2. Signs you might be possessed or just tired. Let's say you wake up one morning feeling a little off. Maybe your joints ache, maybe your dreams were weird, maybe your bread didn't rise quite right. In modern times, you'd chalk it up to bad sleep and underproofed dough. In the Middle Ages, you're possibly possessed. The symptoms of demonic activity were broad, conveniently vague, and mostly indistinguishable from being a normal human having a bad week. Tired all the time? Witch? You cry at night? Witch? You talk to yourself while sweeping? Witch with a side of madness. Your cat sneezed while looking directly at a priest? You're not only a witch, you've probably been hosting Satan's book club in your pantry. Even ordinary things could be reinterpreted as evil. A birthmark was a devil's kiss, a cough during a sermon, a spiritual disturbance. You twitch in your sleep? You were dancing with demons, or maybe you just had a cramp. Either way, you'd better explain it quickly and politely, or risk waking up tied to a stake. The devil, people believed, didn't always announce himself. Sometimes he whispered, hid in your bloodstream, gave you headaches. In a world without medical knowledge, where sneezing could be fatal, every unexplained symptom was suspect. People also believed the devil sent dreams. So if someone said they dreamed about you walking through a field of fire, guess what? You clearly did it and left scorch marks on their subconscious. Fun fact, melancholy, also known as depression, was considered a prime target for demonic influence. Too sad for too long? You're obviously harboring spirits. Cheer up or burn. And let's not forget that being physically ill could count against you, too. Epilepsy, witch, seizures, tremors, migraines, dark forces. You stubbed your toe and screamed. That scream woke up the devil. Congratulations. Women were especially vulnerable. Hormonal shifts, demonic possession, menstrual cramps, a spiritual infection, childbirth pain, possibly divine punishment, or sorcery. Because clearly, nothing about the human body is natural unless a man experiences it. There were no safe symptoms, no diagnostic protection. Just a town full of people who believed demons rode on the backs of headaches and hid in the shadows of coughs. So the next time you're feeling tired, anxious, or emotionally unstable, remember, in medieval Europe, that wasn't a bad day. It was a trial date. Chapter 3. The Herbalist Next Door. Let's say you're kind, quiet, and know how to make a poultice that helps with headaches. In a modern neighborhood, you'd be the sweet old woman everyone brings muffins to. In a medieval village, you're a witch. Being a healer was a dangerous profession, especially if you were a woman. Midwives, herbalists, wise women, grannies who knew the difference between thyme and hemlock, all were walking a line thinner than a broom bristle. The problem was simple. Healing meant power. Power that didn't come from the church or the Lord's manor. Power that didn't ask permission, and that made people nervous. Herbalists used roots, flowers, and barks. They made teas for fever, salves for burns, tinctures for childbirth pain. But if your mixture worked too well, or didn't work at all, someone might say you were working with dark forces, and don't even try to explain how it works. Boil the bark and apply it to the wound sounds a lot like summon demons with tree magic when you're shouting it across a barnyard to someone whose cow just died. Fun fact, yarrow, a common herb for stopping bleeding, was called devil's nettle in some places. That's right, even basic first aid came with a side of blasphemy. Healers were often in high demand but low esteem. Villagers came to you in secret, then accused you in public. You saved a life until the person you saved got sick again. Then suddenly your cure was a curse. Some women tried to legitimize their practice by aligning with saints or using Christian iconography, carving crosses into their tools, invoking divine names. But that didn't always help, because in the eyes of the fearful, too much knowledge looked like sorcery, and too much success looked like a pact with the devil. And heaven help you if your cures were passed down through generations. That wasn't tradition. That was ancestral sorcery. Congratulations, your grandmother's remedy just got you both convicted. The line between healing and heresy was blurry. If you soothed a wound, you were a saint. If the wound festered anyway, you were Satan's intern. So next time someone offers you a natural remedy for your sore throat, remember, in medieval Europe, they'd be tried for witchcraft by nightfall. Chapter 4. Familiars, Frogs, and Furry Scapegoats. You love your cat. It's affectionate, keeps mice out of your grain bin, and occasionally sits on your lap like a little purring miracle. Too bad. That's not a cat. That's a familiar, a demonic sidekick sent by Satan to assist in your unholy errands. In the twisted logic of medieval witch trials, animals weren't just pets, they were evidence. Your cat was a demon in disguise. Your dog was your magical bodyguard. Your toad, probably a spy. Familiars were believed to be small animal-like demons assigned to witches by the devil. They could shapeshift, speak in whispers, and suck blood from witches' marks on your skin. Yes, that mole on your hip? Clearly a feeding port for a frog who works for Beelzebub. And don't think exotic pets were required. A chicken would do. A blackbird. Even a fly buzzing around your window could raise eyebrows. Medieval logic, if it exists and isn't visibly terrified of you, it's obviously working with you. In fact, some people kept animals specifically to prevent accusations, thinking that company might make them appear more normal. Irony, those animals often got them executed faster. Fun fact. During the English witch hunts, one accused woman was said to have a familiar named Pyewacket. It was unclear whether Pyewacket was a cat, a spirit, or just a great name for a band. Animals were sometimes brought into court, live, as witnesses. The judge would inspect them for signs of unnatural behavior, which meant anything other than standing perfectly still and not pooping in public. If they found something odd, like a limp, a weird look in its eye, or a habit of pecking people's toes, and that was enough. And sometimes they executed the animal too. Yes, animals were tried and hanged. Because obviously the best way to stop evil is to threaten a pigeon with death. There was even a popular belief that a familiar could speak, not just communicate, but speak. As if your cat meowed at the wrong moment, someone might insist it was asking the devil for snack recommendations. So if you were poor, lonely, or just enjoyed the company of a furry friend, you were in danger. Because in this world, companionship wasn't cute. It was criminal. So next time your cat glares at your neighbor, don't worry. Today, it's just attitude. Back then, that was grounds for exorcism and a one-way ticket to the stake. Chapter 5. The Gossip Spiral Begins. It starts small. A neighbor mentions that your garden is growing unusually well. Another notices you haven't been to church lately. A third saw you talking to yourself while sweeping. And just like that, you're the most talked about person in town, for all the wrong reasons. In a world where information traveled by mouth, and everyone knew everyone else's shoe size, gossip was both entertainment and legal evidence. Accusations of witchcraft didn't start with curses or fire, they started with whispers. She looked at me funny and my goat died. I lent her some butter, and then my baby got a rash. She has books, in Latin. Congratulations, you've just entered the medieval rumor mill, and it only spins downward. The worst part? You didn't have to do anything wrong. You just had to be different. A little too smart, a little too independent, a little too not miserable enough. People feared what they didn't understand, and in the absence of understanding, they filled the void with suspicion. One whisper became two. Two became a conversation, and by the time someone knocks on your door with a worried expression and asks, "Is it true what they're saying?" it's already too late. Even silence was suspect. If you didn't defend yourself, it meant you had something to hide. If you defended yourself too much, it meant you were trying to cover up the truth. The only safe option was to smile, nod, and hope they moved on to someone else's mole. Fun fact, many witch accusations came from neighbors fighting over land, inheritance, or unpaid debts. Calling someone a witch was the medieval version of "I don't like you and I'd prefer you be executed." This was especially true among women. Widow feuds, family rivalries, disputes over well water, any disagreement could become an accusation. She gave me a dirty look could turn into a court case. A rolled eye became an unholy glare. A sarcastic comment, Hex confirmed. And it didn't help that bad luck needed an explanation. Crops failed? Must have been that woman on the hill. A storm destroyed the roof? Someone angered the spirits. You burned your bread, clearly hexed by your competition. Gossip was powerful. It shaped narratives, created enemies, built fires. And once your name was in someone's mouth, it was only a matter of time before it appeared on parchment, written in ink that wouldn't wash off with innocence. So, the next time you hear someone say, "Did you hear about her?" remember, in medieval Europe, that sentence wasn't followed by a juicy story. It was followed by a rope. Chapter 6. What happens when the church notices you? So far, it's just gossip, whispers, side-eyes at the market. But now the priest is asking questions. And that's never a good sign, because once the church gets involved, it's not a disagreement anymore. It's a moral crisis, a spiritual infection. And they have an obligation to cleanse it with holy water and firewood. The first sign is often subtle. A visit from a clerk. A passing sermon that sounds suspiciously specific. Maybe the priest casually warns that even the most pious faces can hide corruption, while staring directly at you. Soon, questions follow. Have you been attending Mass? Do you pray? What's your relationship with the cat? Then come the inspections. Church representatives might visit your home, look for hidden books, herbal mixtures, unusual carvings. A locked chest, suspicious. A clean house, suspicious. A messy house, also suspicious. You can't win, especially if you're unmarried, educated, or, heaven forbid, literate in Latin. That basically counts as a spell book. Fun fact: inquisitors were trained to look for signs of heresy and witchcraft. Their training included identifying hidden amulets, deciphering local folklore, and having absolutely no sense of humor. They might test you by having you recite prayers backward. Stumble? Guilty, say them too fast. Suspicious? Say nothing. Clearly guilty and rude. If they found a broom in your rafters, flying instrument. A dried frog on your windowsill, familiar's remains. A half-finished loaf of sourdough, too fermented, probably cursed. And heaven help you if you had a journal, writing your thoughts, recording dreams, suspicious at best, treasonous at worst, especially if your handwriting was too neat or too messy. Once the church suspects you, the tone shifts. You're not a neighbor anymore. You're a spiritual hazard. People stop visiting, children stop waving. Your friends start praying for your soul, which is basically medieval speak for, we're assuming the worst. Soon enough, a formal accusation is made. A parchment scroll, sealed and stamped. You are summoned for questioning. You have the right to speak, but no one has the obligation to believe you. So the next time someone says, "It's just a harmless church visit," remember, in the Middle Ages, that visit came with incense, rope, and someone whispering, "We're doing this for your salvation." Because when the church notices you, it's not admiration, it's an investigation. Let's ground this in history. In 1484, Pope Innocent VIII issued a papal bull titled Summis Desiderante Effectibus, officially authorizing the Inquisition to go after witches. That document, complete with creepy Latin and papal authority, gave rise to one of the most notorious books in history, the Malleus Maleficarum, or the Hammer of Witches. Written by Heinrich Kramer, it was a handbook for identifying, prosecuting, and disposing of witches. The Malleus argued that women were more susceptible to witchcraft because they were, quote, feebler in both mind and body. That's theology, folks, brought to you by the same system that excommunicated Galileo. Church investigators became state-authorized witch hunters. They were encouraged to travel from town to town inspecting people's homes, bodies, and beliefs. Many were paid per conviction. There's even a chilling account from Germany, where a woman was accused simply because she had once walked alone in the woods and was found collecting mushrooms. The inquisitor claimed she was gathering ingredients for charms. The mushrooms? Evidence. The fact that she was poor and childless? Confirming signs. By the time the church notices you, there's a theological machine warming up behind them. Sermons start to shift in tone. Neighbors start quoting scripture. And your name finds its way into someone's prayer, not to bless it, but to contain it. Because in medieval theology, salvation was important, but fear got things done. Chapter 7. How to Not Get Arrested. Good luck. So, you've heard the rumors. You've seen the side eyes. The priest looked at your laundry basket a little too long, and now you're wondering, how do I avoid getting arrested for being a witch? Here's the hard truth, you probably can't. Still, let's say you want to try. The first rule: be invisible. Smile. Nod. Bake your bread like everyone else, but not better than everyone else. Don't stand out. Don't fall behind. Stay in the middle of the social herd like a deer hoping the wolves eat someone slower. Avoid being too helpful. Heal someone? Witch, refuse to help? Witch, offer advice? Witch, stay silent? Suspiciously quiet. Also, witch. If you're a woman, marry early. Bonus points if you marry someone who's bad at noticing your hobbies. Single women were considered too independent. Widows were seen as unrestrained. A married woman with no children? Suspicious? With too many children? Also suspicious. Have kids but no husband? Scandalous. Live alone. Witch? Live with your sister? Possibly a coven. Live with your mother? Generational witchcraft. Your home should be tidy, but not too tidy. An organized space meant control, which meant secrets. But a messy house. Clearly signs of neglect or demonic influence. You really can't win. Don't own strange objects. No feathers, bones, stones, bundles of herbs, candles in odd places, or anything that smells too strong. If your kitchen looks like a spice rack exploded, you're already in trouble. And if you own a mortar and pestle, hide it. That's how potion rumors start. Avoid being seen after dark. Witches roam at night. So do drunks. If you're both, you're cursed and also late. Fun fact: in some regions, women were discouraged from singing while working. A joyful melody while churning butter could attract the devil, or worse, attract attention. And whatever you do, never, ever be seen muttering while stirring a pot. You may be talking to yourself. You may be praying. You may be reciting a recipe. But to a superstitious crowd, you are casting a spell to hex the local baker's goat into spontaneous combustion. So, if you're trying to avoid arrest, don't be too loud, don't be too quiet, don't help, don't hide, don't stand out, don't be alone, don't be with others, don't breathe irregularly, and above all, don't look like a witch. Which is hard, because in the end, a witch looks exactly like you. Chapter 8. The Surprise. Witch Check, aka Visitation. You're tending your herbs. You hear footsteps. Before you can ask who's there, a priest, 2 local officials, and a man holding rope are standing at your door. Congratulations. It's inspection time. In the world of witch trials, due process meant the town council showing up unannounced to rummage through your belongings, question your lifestyle, and examine your body for signs of evil. They called it an inquiry. You might call it a deeply unpleasant Tuesday. First, they searched your home. They were looking for anything unusual: dried herbs, wax dolls, bundles of sticks, locked boxes, a journal, a broom. Found a bone in your compost pile? Better hope it's chicken. Have extra candles. Clearly, for rituals. No candles. You're hiding your rituals. A painting of the Virgin Mary. You're pretending to be pious. A blank wall? Very suspicious. Possibly a summoning surface. Then came the personal part. The officials would examine your body for witches' marks. Small blemishes, moles, birthmarks, or scars believed to be feeding spots for your demonic familiar. They stripped you, searched your scalp, armpits, groin, and feet. Sometimes they shaved your entire body to check for hidden spots. Medical knowledge? Minimal. Privacy? Non-existent. Dignity? Hope you enjoyed it while it lasted. Fun fact: some examiners used special needles to poke any marks they found. If it didn't bleed, or you didn't flinch, that meant it was a devil's mark. What they rarely mentioned was the needles were often dull or retractable, designed to fail. This witch pricking became so widespread that people made careers out of it. Traveling witch finders offered their services, for a fee, of course, like door-to-door snake oil salesmen, but with fewer ethics and more needles. And once you were examined, even if they found nothing, it didn't matter. The act of being inspected turned rumor into reality. People saw the officials at your door. That was enough. Something must have been found. Something had to be there. From that moment on, you were under surveillance, forbidden to leave town, barred from church. People tracked your movements, visitors, firewood consumption, because of course witches needed warmth too. So if you're ever worried about a surprise inspection at work, just remember, in medieval Europe, surprise inspections came with ropes, needles, and the assumption that your cat was whispering satanic prophecies while you slept. Chapter 9. Welcome to Prison. So the town suspects you. You've passed the witch's mark exam or didn't. The officials didn't like your soup, your pet, or your refusal to cry on command. Now you're arrested. Prison, medieval style, was not about rehabilitation. It wasn't even about justice. It was a waiting room, a dark, damp purgatory where you sat until someone decided what to do with you. Spoiler, it rarely ended with an apology and a cupcake. The cell? A stone box, no windows, no toilet, no straw unless someone liked you. You might share the space with rats, insects, or a very confused chicken that was also under suspicion. The smell? Imagine mildew, despair, and the ghost of every prisoner who came before you. The air was wet, cold, and thick enough to chew. Ventilation was a crack in the wall. Plumbing was medieval. You weren't given a uniform. You wore what you were arrested in. If that was night clothes, too bad. If it was nothing at all, still too bad. And if it got cold, well, witches don't need comfort. They need to reflect on their alleged broom-related crimes. Food came once or twice a day, usually bread, maybe some gruel, always stale, always minimal. If you had family who dared to help, they might sneak in extra, at great risk. Compassion could be incriminating. Fun fact, some jails charged inmates rent. Yes, you had to pay to be imprisoned. Food, bedding, candles, all optional extras billed to your non-existent tab. Can't pay, you got darkness, silence, and your own thoughts, which weren't helpful. Your name became legend. The baker whispered it. The priest reinterpreted it. The children repeated it, without knowing what it meant. You weren't a person anymore. You were a tale, a shadow in the corner of the town's story. You tried to prepare for your trial, if you were lucky enough to get one. But writing a defense was hard when your ink was mold, your parchment was the wall, and your only legal advisor was a spider spinning in the ceiling crack. Time passed like molasses in January, slowly, brutally, and always in the dark. So next time someone says their overnight stay in county lockup was rough, remind them. In the Middle Ages, prison was less temporary inconvenience and more, you live here now and it hates you. Chapter 10. Torture for the Truth. So you're in prison, cold, alone, hungry. Your neighbors avoid your name like it's contagious. But hey, it could be worse, right? Nope. Now it's time for torture. Because in the medieval justice system, the fastest way to truth was a good, solid scream. If you weren't already confessing, the logic went, you just hadn't been asked hard enough. You were brought to a chamber, a room with heavy doors, iron hooks, a table, and at least one man with calloused hands and a disturbingly calm voice. He'd ask questions like a priest and swing iron like a butcher. At first, they were civil. They offered you a seat right before tying your ankles to it. They asked questions gently until your answers got them mad. Then came the devices, the thumbscrews. They crushed your fingers inch by inch until you felt bones pop and skin tear. The rack. You were stretched like a bedsheet being ironed by a blacksmith. The strapado. You were hoisted by your arms and dropped. Not far, just far enough for your shoulders to stop cooperating. Sometimes they got creative. Sleep deprivation, cold water dunkings, tying your arms behind your back so tightly your fingers went numb while they waited for you to feel inspired. Fun fact: torture wasn't just for confessions, it was also for detail. If you already confessed, now they wanted names, places, dates, devil descriptions, broom models, potion ingredients. Bonus points for listing your Sabbath snacks. They were writing a story, and you were the lead character. You didn't just make a pact with the devil. You went on adventures, you had meetings. You probably played board games with Beelzebub. The more you said, the more they pressed, and the more you didn't say, the more they pressed, literally. And no matter what you confessed, they always seemed to already know the answer. Almost like they'd written the ending ahead of time and were just waiting for you to act it out. So, if you ever think your job interview was a little uncomfortable, remember, in medieval witch trials, "We just have a few questions" was followed by a winch, a scream, and the kind of back pain that didn't go away. Let's step into a real torture chamber. In Bamberg, Germany, during the witch craze of the 1620s, a man named Johannes Junius, the town's former mayor, was arrested for witchcraft. He was respected, literate, and wealthy. But that didn't matter. He was tortured until he confessed. But before his execution, he smuggled a letter out to his daughter. It survives to this day. In it, he wrote, "Many things which I confessed are untrue, yet I had to confess them. I was then told that I would be put to the rack again. I said that rather than suffer that again, I would confess more. God pardon them, for they know not what they do." But that's not fiction. That's a real man, writing in real fear, admitting that truth had become optional, and agony was doing the storytelling. And remember, most people didn't even know what to confess. They had to guess. They tried to think of something convincing, a flying dream, a strange mole. At time they accidentally spilled salt and didn't clean it up. Because the goal wasn't to find evil. It was to build a narrative. One that justified the pain, one that made the people holding the chains feel righteous. And the moment you started talking, that story wrote itself. Chapter 11. Confessions Under Duress, aka Lies for Survival. By now, your joints are screaming louder than you are. You've been pulled, prodded, burned, dunked, and asked the same question 47 different ways. Eventually, the truth doesn't matter. You just want it to stop, so you confess. You say things you didn't do, things you can't explain, things that no one could do, except maybe in a bad dream or a really weird stage play. I signed a pact with the devil. I kissed a black goat and it spoke Latin. I flew on a broom and landed in a walnut tree during a thunderstorm while singing backwards. I cursed my neighbor's oven, on purpose, because her bread was better than mine. It sounds absurd, because it is, but no one's laughing, they're nodding, writing it down, feeding the fire, because the system didn't want truth, it wanted confirmation. You were already guilty, they just needed your agreement. Think of it as compliance under extreme spiritual duress. Fun fact, some confessions were so bizarre, they sounded like fantasy novels: flying Sabbaths, talking animals, shape-shifting, secret dances in forests with demonic flutes. And yet, courts accepted them as fact, because imagination under pain is apparently admissible. You start naming times, dates, rituals. You start agreeing to things you barely understand. You even begin to believe parts of it, because reality becomes stretchy in a room without sleep or sunlight. And when you break, they act like it's a victory. You see, the devil is among us, and now they have you to prove it. So you confess, again and again, until it becomes performance, until your own story starts to feel distant, like you're playing a role that was written by someone else, not because it's true, but because stopping the story costs more than finishing it. So the next time someone says, "Just tell the truth and it'll be fine," remember, in a witch trial, the truth wasn't the goal, a confession was. Chapter 12. Now, name names. You've confessed. You've signed your name in something that might be ink or maybe just hope. You've cried, or gone completely numb. You've said you flew, cursed, danced, whispered. You'd think it ends there. It doesn't. Because now they want names. Who was there with you? Who taught you the spell for soured milk? Who helped you light the Sabbath fire? Who whispered in Latin while feeding chickens? This is where the hunt really begins, because one witch is dramatic. But many witches, that's an emergency, an infestation, a moral epidemic. You name someone. Maybe it's the neighbor who glared at you. Maybe it's your cousin who never liked your dog. Maybe it's the midwife. People always suspected her anyway. The more names you give, the more cooperative you seem. The more cooperative you seem, the more merciful they might be, or at least they might pretend to consider it. Fun fact, in some cases, witch trials ballooned into mass purges because one terrified person named a dozen others. In the Salem witch trials alone, one young girl's accusation led to dozens of arrests and multiple executions, just from panic and peer pressure. And those you name, they'll be questioned, pressed, examined for marks. Some will confess, some won't. Some will name you right back. And suddenly, everyone's stories are overlapping like a very painful improv class gone wrong. This is how fear reproduces itself. Fast, messy, and loud, like fire in dry hay. And the worst part? Naming others won't save you. They may promise leniency. They may smile when you speak, but your rope is already cut, your pyre already stacked. They're just enjoying the ride. So you speak. You give them what they want. Not because it's real, but because you've forgotten what real feels like. So the next time someone says, "Who else was there?" remember, in a witch trial, naming names didn't lighten the sentence. It just spread the fire. Chapter 13. Trial by Bias. The court is ready. The villagers are watching. The judge has a beard, a frown, and a Bible the size of a wagon wheel. Welcome to your trial, where the verdict is preheated and your defense has already been labeled heresy with seasoning. Witch trials weren't about discovering the truth. They were about confirming a feeling, a gut instinct, a whisper passed from kitchen to pulpit. It didn't matter what you said, it mattered what they already believed. The judge? Often a man with legal training, religious devotion, and the patience of a boiling cauldron. The jury? Your neighbors? The same ones who once asked for your soup recipe and are now nodding while someone describes you flying in the night air. The prosecutor? Possibly the man who confiscated your broom and now keeps it in his shed for evidence. And you? You're allowed to speak, technically. Just don't raise your voice, or lower it too much, or speak Latin, or say God in a way that feels off. Show too much emotion. Witch, show too little. Ice-hearted witch, say nothing. Guilty, say too much, manipulative. It's courtroom theater, and you're playing the villain. Fun fact: in many early modern witch trials, women weren't allowed to represent themselves, or even speak, without a male relative. If you didn't have a man to defend your innocence, you were presumed guilty by default. No man, no mercy. Evidence could include spectral sightings, spontaneous nosebleeds, crops that failed 2 towns over, and anything involving livestock behaving oddly. Someone dreamed about you feeding a bat, and that was strong evidence. Bonus points if the bat had red eyes. Even the way you stood in court mattered. Too confident? Proud witch? Nervous? Deceptive witch? Calm? Sorceress in disguise. Your body language was on trial just as much as your words. And the questions they asked were riddles with no right answers. Do you renounce the devil? Say yes. You admit you knew him. Say no. Well, nice knowing you. Do you deny your powers? Say yes. You're lying. Say no. Thanks for confirming. This wasn't a trial. It was a crucible. And you were already halfway to ash. So the next time you complain about jury duty, remember, in a witch trial, no one was listening for the truth. They were just waiting for their turn to nod. Let's go to Salem, Massachusetts, 1692. Bridget Bishop, the first woman executed in the Salem witch trials, stood in court while witnesses claimed she appeared to them in spectral form, pinched them in their sleep, and once wore odd clothing. Her crime? She was outspoken. She ran a tavern. She wore bright red. One accuser said she saw a shadow shaped like Bishop choking her during a nightmare. The court took it seriously. There was no physical evidence, no curses, no magic, just fear, performance, and gender politics wrapped in theology. Anne Whittle, one of the so-called Pendle witches in 17th century England, was a poor, elderly beggar with a limp and a failing memory. She confessed to using magic because her interrogators wouldn't let her go home otherwise. In her desperation, she described meeting a devilish black dog, likely echoing folklore or hearsay. Was it real? Or had she simply seen a dog and realized that saying the right thing might finally earn her rest? Her story, like so many, became less about evil and more about exhaustion, and the quiet tragedy of a woman agreeing to anything just to be left alone. The trials weren't interested in facts. They were interested in confirmation bias with costumes. If your story didn't match their assumptions, it was false. If it did, it was rehearsed. Either way, they'd already circled your name. The judge was rarely impartial. The crowd wanted closure. The church wanted spectacle. You were the only one looking for truth, and truth had already been outlawed. So, next time someone says, "Let the courts decide," remember, sometimes the courts are just a stage, and everyone's already bought tickets. Chapter 14. Evidence? We don't need evidence. You've made it to court. Maybe you're still in chains. Maybe you've been allowed a seat, as long as you don't look too comfortable. Now it's time for the prosecution to present its case. You hope for logic, documentation, eyewitnesses who aren't confused livestock. What you get is vibes. Because in a witch trial, evidence didn't mean proof. It meant suspicion made visible. It meant dream fragments, natural misfortune, and mole inspections. The more ordinary the event, the more sinister its explanation. Let's review the evidence you might face. A mole, wart, or scar. Devil's teat. Your neighbor's butter won't churn. Clearly your fault. A storm hit during your laundry day. You summoned it. Someone fell while carrying a bucket. You cursed their balance. Float in water. You're unnatural. Sink. Innocent, but also dead. Burn and scream. Guilty. Burn and stay silent. Possessed. Fun fact: in the 17th century, some courts accepted the touch test. If a victim convulsed at your touch, that was considered proof of witchcraft. Because, people never flinch under pressure or trauma. One of the most absurd proofs was the existence of spectral residue, essentially emotional fingerprints. If someone got goosebumps near your house, or a baby cried near your doorway, that meant your dark energy was leaking. It's important to note, this wasn't random chaos. It was structured paranoia, given robes, scrolls, and candles to make it look official. Even your pets were fair game. If your dog barked at a priest, that was contempt of church. If your chicken laid too many eggs, or not enough, that was unnatural fertility or cursed infertility. Your everyday life became a trap. Nothing you did, or didn't do, could absolve you. So if you've ever felt judged for what you wore, what you said, or what you didn't say, imagine all of that. Except the judge is holding a noose and the jury just watched a goat sneeze in your direction. In a witch trial, absence of guilt wasn't innocence. It was just another reason to dig deeper. Chapter 15. Spectral Evidence and Dream Testimony. By now, you've confessed under duress, named names, and answered the same 3 questions 600 ways. You'd think they'd need actual, physical evidence to finish the job. Nope. Enter spectral evidence, the legal practice of accepting dreams, visions, nightmares, hallucinations, and psychic vibes as proof. Did someone dream you attacked them? Which? Did they feel a pain while thinking about you? Definitely you. Did a child say you appeared in their room at night and whispered strange words? That's not trauma. That's testimony. It didn't matter that you were locked in a cell. Witches, they said, could send their spirits flying through keyholes. Your body didn't need to leave. Your soul had already made the trip. And because dreams are, dreams. Anything goes. You flew. You pinched someone. You rode a pig backwards while wearing a crown of snakes. All possible. All admissible. All very bad for your defense. Fun fact: in the infamous Salem trials, most of the evidence came from the dreams and visions of teenage girls. They screamed, claimed to see spirits, said someone's specter was choking them, and the courts listened. The worst part? You couldn't disprove any of it. You can't cross-examine a nightmare. You can't tell a judge that didn't happen when the judge believes that thoughts leave bruises. This was a court case written by the subconscious, staged by hysteria, and produced by a culture that feared women, night, nature, and the color black. So, the next time someone tells you dreams don't mean anything, just remember, in the 1600s, someone's nap might have been your death sentence. Chapter 16. Public Spectacle, Personal Collapse. Your trial is over. You're guilty. not because of what you did, but because of who you are. And now, the village needs closure, not privately, not quietly, but with a crowd. Because in medieval Europe, executions weren't just punishments, they were performances. The town square is swept clean, which is ironic, given what's about to happen. Merchants pause their stalls. Mothers gather children. The priest polishes his voice. The executioner sharpens his tools. You? You're trying to remember how it feels to be human, while your wrists are tied too tightly and your legs feel like borrowed weight. They say justice is blind. But here? She squints dramatically at the accused while the audience buys snacks. You're walked through town. The same roads where you bought bread, the same windows you once waved at. Only now those windows are closed, curtains drawn, doors bolted, and the air buzzes with whispers. Not prayers, not sympathy, just curiosity. Historical note. During the Würzburg witch trials, 1626 to 1631, in 17th century Germany, executions became so frequent that even the executioners complained of exhaustion and back pain. Over the course of 5 years, around 219 people, including children, were burned, swept up in one of Europe's most devastating witch panics. The crowds didn't diminish. They grew. You're brought to the platform. The ropes are checked. The firewood is stacked. The pyre is built not just to destroy your body, but to send a message. You're not just being punished, you're being made an example. Somewhere nearby, a scribe records your last words. He hopes you say something dramatic, something that makes it into the town's records, or better yet, gets repeated in taverns for years. If you curse them, it proves your guilt. If you forgive them, the devil is trying to confuse us. If you stay silent, that's guilt too. You might be allowed a priest. He'll ask you to confess one last time, not to save you, but to save them, so the town can sleep tonight knowing they killed you for the right reasons. Children sit on their father's shoulders watching. Some cry, some giggle. One woman in the back clutches her rosary so tightly her knuckles go white. Not because she doubts your guilt, but because she knows deep down it could have been her. Fun fact, the term scapegoat comes from a biblical ritual in which one goat was sacrificed and the other was released into the wilderness carrying the community's sins. You? You're the first goat, the one that gets burned. And as the flames are lit, as smoke climbs into the sky and heat touches your skin, the village exhales. They feel safe again, for now. They believe they've destroyed evil, but all they've really done is lit a bonfire under their own fear. Because you weren't evil, you were just visible. Chapter 17. Execution Methods. Vary, none are great. So you've been found guilty. The priest has prayed, the town has watched. The sentence is final. Now, all that's left is the method, because contrary to popular belief, witches weren't always burned. Sometimes they were hanged, sometimes drowned. Occasionally pressed with stones. Every region had its preferred flavor of finality. Let's break down the medieval execution menu. Burning at the stake. The dramatic favorite. Wood piled high, tied to a post. Flames rising. It wasn't just about death, it was about sending a message. Burning was slow, painful, intended to purify the soul by fire. If you were lucky, and we use that term loosely, someone sympathetic might tie a bag of gunpowder around your neck. Quick boom, less suffering, usually. Hanging, considered more merciful. But if the rope was too long, you strangled slowly. Too short, Your neck snapped instantly, if you were lucky. Some places gave you a stool to stand on. Others just pulled the cart away. Drowning. Sometimes called trial by water. If you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, you were innocent, and also dead. They said God would protect the innocent. God seemed busy. Pressing. Less common, more horrifying. You were laid on the ground and stones were piled on top of you until your body broke, or you confessed, or both. Fun fact. One famous case involved a man being pressed for refusing to plead. His last words were, "More weight," medieval mic drop. Execution wasn't just death, it was narrative. You were made into a story, a symbol. This is what happens when evil visits our town, they'd say, ignoring the fact that evil looked a lot like the helpful woman who cured their cough last year. And your final words? Often scripted. If you cursed them, it proved you were evil. If you forgave them, they'd say the devil was trying to confuse them. If you stayed silent, that was guilt too. Bonus detail. Afterward, your body might be buried in unconsecrated ground, if buried at all. Sometimes your ashes were scattered. Sometimes your bones were burned again, just in case. So, if you ever feel like your performance review at work is unnecessarily theatrical, just remember. In medieval Europe, your final evaluation came with torches, applause, and absolutely no right to appeal. Chapter 18. What happens after you die? Hint, more accusations. You've been tried, tortured, executed. That should be the end, right? Not in medieval Europe. Because in a world obsessed with sin, fear, and reputation, death wasn't the finish line. It was the opening ceremony for even more drama. First, your possessions. Accused witches often had their homes searched post-execution. Anything left behind, herbal remedies, cooking tools, a slightly weird-looking rock, could now be evidence. Even your furniture wasn't safe. That stool you used to sit on and knit, probably enchanted. That pot, cursed. That broom? We've been over this. Then came your family. A husband might be questioned. A sister brought in for inspection. Children observed for signs. Because clearly, if you were guilty, someone else had to be guilty too. Witchcraft, in their minds, ran in families. Generational trauma, meet generational prosecution. Fun fact. Entire households were sometimes implicated after a single accusation. In one case, 4 generations were executed in succession, all because one woman smiled too much during a thunderstorm. Your animals might be executed. Cats, dogs, goats, any surviving familiar was often hunted down and killed. Your land, forfeit. Confiscated by the town, the church, or whichever neighbor had the most ambition and the fewest morals. And your memory, scrubbed. No prayers, no burial in sacred ground, no mourning. Your name became a warning, your story twisted into a cautionary tale told to children over soup. Don't be like her, don't be different, don't ask too many questions. You were erased, except for the myth that replaced you. So if you think cancel culture is a modern invention, consider this. In medieval Europe, your reputation could be publicly flayed long after your body had been burned. Because in the aftermath of a witch trial, the punishment didn't end with death. It started there. Chapter 19. The Cleansing of a Village. The execution is over. The body is gone. The ash has cooled. Now comes the cleansing. In theory, this was the town's chance to recover, to breathe a sigh of relief and say, "The evil is gone." But in practice, it just meant the villagers were now more afraid than ever, because if one witch was hiding among them, who else might be? The town priest delivers a sermon about vigilance. The local officials pat themselves on the back, and the people look sideways at each other over the market stalls, clutching their rosaries and asking whether the devil has really left the building. You see, the witch trial wasn't about solving a problem. It was about redefining it, reframing misfortune as malice, turning hardship into a person you could punish. And once that person's gone, the fear doesn't vanish. It mutates. That woman with the limp, suspicious, the shepherd whose sheep keep wandering, clearly cursed, the child who talks in his sleep, marked by spirits, the man who sneezed twice during prayer, say no more. Fun fact, after a major witch execution, some towns launched safety audits. These included forced home blessings, herb purges, and public confessions of impure thoughts, just in case. It wasn't protection, it was paranoia with a schedule. And while everyone claimed the village was now cleansed, what they meant was, we got rid of someone we didn't like, and we hope that buys us another year of safety. People doubled down on rituals, more holy water, more candlelight vigils, more fasting, less dancing, less joking, less breathing too confidently. The cost? A permanent chill in the air, a village full of suspicion and silence. You never knew who was watching. You never knew which old friend might become your next accuser. And so the cycle continued. Because once you define evil as the outsider, you'll always find another one. So the next time you hear a community claim they've cut out the poison, ask yourself, was it poison they removed? Or just someone who made them uncomfortable? Chapter 20. Why You Were Never a Witch. Let's be clear. You weren't a witch, you weren't casting spells, you weren't summoning demons, you weren't dancing with the devil under a full moon while whispering ancient incantations into the ear of a toad. You were different. Maybe you were poor, or unmarried, or didn't smile enough, or smiled too much. Maybe you had opinions, or healed someone, or kept to yourself. Maybe you liked herbs, or books, or solitude, or cats. You were smart, gentle, sharp, kind, lonely, resilient, loud, curious, human. And in a world ruled by fear and control, that made you dangerous. Because witch trials weren't about rooting out evil. They were about enforcing sameness. They were about maintaining the status quo, about making sure people didn't stand out, speak up, or walk differently. Witches weren't burned because they had power. They were burned because someone else wanted to keep theirs. Fun fact, decades later, even centuries, many of the people accused of witchcraft were posthumously pardoned. Governments said, oops. Churches apologized. Statues were built, plaques placed. Too late, of course, but the effort was there. And while the fires are long extinguished, the logic behind them still flickers. People still fear what they don't understand. Still point fingers when they feel powerless. Still rewrite stories to turn outsiders into villains. You were never a witch. You were a scapegoat, a story, a warning, a mirror they didn't want to look into. But you endured, your story survived, and today we say your name without shame, and light a candle for the person you really were. So as you drift off tonight, safe and unburned, remember, the witch wasn't the one with the herbs. It was the fear that set them on fire. So, what have we learned? that in the Middle Ages, and for centuries after, being different could get you killed. That survival didn't depend on guilt or innocence, but on obedience, on silence, on not drawing attention while the town looked for someone to burn. We've seen how the definition of a witch was always changing, always shifting to fit the fear of the moment. One day it was herbal knowledge, the next, a sleepless night, the next, a child's dream. Truth was a candle in a windstorm, easy to snuff, impossible to see clearly. We've seen how trials weren't about justice, they were about reinforcement, about re-establishing power structures, silencing nonconformity, and making sure the next different person knew what happened to the last. We've seen that evidence was imaginary, confessions were manufactured, and execution was public theater, designed less to punish than to instruct, to warn, to entertain. We've watched as people named names to save themselves, and in doing so, spread the fire. Because the only thing more contagious than fear is the illusion of safety bought at someone else's expense. And we've seen that even death wasn't the end, that the shame continued, that the erasure was intentional, that entire families, homes, and histories were swept away with the ashes. And yet, you endured. Not in body, but in story. Your name was buried, yes, but not forgotten. Your image twisted, but not erased. You, the quiet midwife, the eccentric widow, the sharp-tongued healer, the unmarried scholar, became a warning. But over time, that warning changed. You were no longer a cautionary tale, you became a symbol. A reflection of every person who's been punished for being too much, too loud, too ambitious, too joyful, too angry, too unusual. And as centuries passed, people began to say your name with honor. They wrote books, planted memorials, passed laws, lit candles not to condemn you, but to remember you. Historical note: in 2022, Scotland formally apologized for its role in historic witch trials, centuries after thousands were executed. Other nations have followed. It's not much, but it's a beginning. Why this still matters? Because witch hunts haven't disappeared. They've just changed clothes. They no longer need firewood. They just need internet. They don't need priests, just a whisper, a screenshot, a headline. We still exile people for being strange, for being inconvenient, for being other. We still use fear to flatten nuance. We still weaponize gossip. We still demand apologies when someone dares to be different, and we still punish them when they give it. But here's the twist. You reading this now? You're part of the antidote. Because remembering the past isn't just academic, it's protective. When we tell these stories, in full, in detail, with discomfort and clarity, we light a candle against forgetting. We keep those matches wet. So sleep well tonight, knowing that your cat is just a cat, your love of herbs is a hobby, and your silence, your singing, your ambition, your softness. None of it is criminal. You are no longer alone in the village. You are surrounded by people who see what was done and say, never again, because the world still has fear. But now it also has memory, and memory holds the fire back.